Okay.
My name is Walter Beckhardt. I'm Jacqueline's grandfather, and I was born July 3rd, 1925, in a small town in Germany, Mainz. It's on the Rhine. It's not too far from Frankfurt. And I grew up and I had a very nice childhood. Then in 1933, Adolf Hitler took over and things changed completely. First thing is they ruined my father's business, so he had to sell it at a very cheap price. And as he had no income, he moved from Mainz to Berlin. And he bought another business there, which didn't last too long because the Nazis again ruined it. Then he was, in 1940, called to the secret police, the SS, and an SS colonel interviewed him, and that what he was doing about leaving Germany. So my father said, we are waiting to get visas for the United States. And he said, what is your number? I think our number was 45,000. He said, well, this will take too long. Now I'm nice to you, but next year I will call you again, and then I will not be so nice to you. And my father knew exactly what that meant, that he would put him into concentration camp. So now my father really tried hard to do something, and we got visas for the Dominican Republic. You had to pay for them, and you couldn't really go to the Dominican Republic. But we knew that if you go to Panama, they would let you in and they would not throw you out. Now, we couldn't cross the Atlantic, so we had to go to Japan. And we went from Berlin, where we lived in the end, we went by train to Moscow, and then we took the Trans-Siberia Railroad all the way through Russia to a town called Otpor. And it was in winter, and I remember I looked out of the window, and all you saw was snow. Nothing but snow, occasionally a railroad station, no houses, nothing else. When we came to Otpor, it was still very cold. It was like 25 degrees below. But there we took a train which went through North Korea. I mean, at that time it was all one country. But it would today be North Korea, South Korea. And then there we had to take a ship to Japan. And when we got to Japan, we had to take a railroad again to a city called Kobe. And there we were met on the train, and someone told us, you can't go to Panama. Panama doesn't let any people come anymore. So we got stuck in Japan, and the Japanese permitted us to stay for 8 months. And then it came close to Pearl Harbor, so the Japanese knew if a war would break out, that they would have to support us. So they didn't want this, so they put us on a ship and they sent us to Shanghai, China. And that was a completely different story. Shanghai was a terrible town. In the beginning it wasn't so bad, but at the same time that Pearl Harbor happened, the Japanese took over Shanghai, and we were under the Japanese army for the whole war. We stayed there till 1947. We lived in a camp, which was very bad. The 4 people, that is my parents, my grandmother, and I, lived in a small room that was like 8 by 8 foot, no heating. It was very cold in winter and very hot in summer, like 110 degrees. There was not enough food. My parents and my grandmother constantly were sick, so it was a very, very bad time. Then finally in 1945, the Americans dropped atomic bombs on Japan, and Japan capitulated, and the war was over. But it still took us 2 more years before we could go to America. We arrived in San Francisco, and the nicest thing I ever saw was a Golden Gate Bridge. It was like hanging like a spider web up in the sky above. It was very foggy that day. But I still remember that was the nicest thing I ever saw in my whole life. And then we took a train from San Francisco to New York, first to Chicago. There we had to change trains, and it took 4 days till we got to New York. Now, I had a sister who came to America in 1938. She got married in 1945, and then I saw her again for the first time since 1938 in 9 years. And that was actually our story. And that was the end of it.
So, you said you lived in a camp in, like, China. What do you mean, like a camp, like a ghetto?
It was like a ghetto. But there were no guards there. It was just a camp for people who came from Europe and had no money and didn't have any place to live. I worked, but the pay was so small, we couldn't afford rent. So living in the camp, which didn't cost anything. But it was a very, very crowded place. First we were 2 families in one room. Then finally we got one room which was like 8 by 8 feet, and there we lived during the whole war. So it was not very nice.
And when you were like still in Europe, did you ever see like Nazi guards or like?
Oh sure, you saw Nazis marching all over. And when the war started, the British bombed us. And we had anti-aircraft guns behind our house. And when the British came, the first thing is they sent fighter pilots with machine guns to shoot at the German aircraft guns, and the German soldiers ran away. And then the British came with bombers and bombed Berlin. And every morning when I went to school, which was pretty far away, I called up to find out if the school wasn't bombed out. So it was very bad. But naturally, under the Nazis, nothing was nice.
Yeah.
And especially being Jewish was especially bad.
Yeah. Did you ever see any bombs or like falling or anything?
Well, one night we didn't hear the air raid. So we looked out of the windows through the shades, and we saw the British coming and dropping bombs, and then you saw the shells of the anti-aircraft guns. But we didn't go to the basement because it was too late.
Yeah.
But all the other times we went into the basement. But they bombed Berlin, but they didn't do it so bad yet. Later on it was much worse after we left.
Do you ever meet, like, come in contact with a Nazi, or, like, were there any close calls or anything?
Oh, well, you constantly met Nazis because practically everybody was a Nazi by that time.
How about your father? He went to the Gestapo.
Oh, that I told. Yeah, that was the only time we met, my father really met a really high Nazi, the one who interviewed him, and that he better be next year, not in Germany anymore.
Why did he let him go?
Well, he said, I'll let you go today, but if you're next year still here, I won't be so nice to you. And he probably was nice to my father because he was a veteran of World War I. So that was something that was an advantage.
Yeah.
But otherwise there were no advantages.
And,
Did you panic with it?
did you ever have to wear, like, the Star of David on
No,
your
that came after we left.
That came after?
Yeah, this was lucky we didn't.
Yeah.
But we were not permitted in any park. We couldn't sit on a park bench. By 8 o'clock we had to be at home. And we couldn't go any place, not to a movie house or anything. Everything was prohibited. Now, naturally, they couldn't see that we were Jewish, but if they would say, show us your identification, and there was a J on it for Jewish, immediately they would arrest you, so you were careful not to do things which were wrong.
How did you get, like, your food and stuff?
Well, we could go to stores and buy, but there were coupons which you got. So everything was very limited, and it was just enough not to starve.
Yeah. So, like, did you ever see Hitler or anything since you were in Germany?
No, he was there naturally because we were in Berlin, in the same city where he was. But I was careful not to get too close to him.
Do you know if your parents ever saw him or anybody you know?
No, they didn't either. You know, when they had a big meeting where the Nazis were meeting together, it was not healthy if you were Jewish to be
Yeah.
there.